Hi everyone, my name is Vichal and we have Sachin with us as usual. In our second episode, specifically what we want to talk about was building a sales team. The reason being, I think in the recent past, Sachin had a conversation with a friend. I had a conversation with a colleague from some time back about how they could build a team that could sell in an international market. In Sachin's case, that was US. In my case, that was SCA. So when that came into picture, I thought, okay, that's a very pretty fair question, right? Especially when you are trying to expand your business from, let's say, if you're a small business, you're trying to expand into larger markets or expand your business in the existing market. One of the primary things that we do is hire a sales team, right? And with our expertise, with Sachin's expertise of running and building multiple teams across multiple companies, targeting multiple markets across the world, it made sense to have this discussion. So as usual, Sachin, I'm going to ask you questions, and uh, hopefully there will be answers that we could definitely help all of us who have this specific
Hopefully.
uh, query. And yeah, so here we go. Here's my first question to you.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm going to start at the really at the beginning, right? Uh, when let's say you have a company, we have done everything that needs to be done. We have built out all the a product and everything is ready. Some initial conversations have happened. Founders have sold it. Now is time to build a sales team, right? But the first question that I would want to ask is just one step behind. What is the criteria to say this? Hey, now is the right time to actually hire sales folks and build this team out. Like, when do you decide that it is the right time to build your sales team?
Yeah. So, I mean, it again varies depending on the product, actually, the product that you have built and the kind of customers you're targeting. So, let's assume it's a typical SaaS product. In that case, you should only start, I mean, basically start the hiring process, basically hire your first sales hire in a sales kind of role only when you have enough leads, which kind of drives your business, right? So if you don't have enough leads, or you don't have enough sources of leads, or you don't have enough validation, you should not be hiring another sales guy. So it does not have to be product market fit situation kind of thing, but you should have enough kind of opportunities to be pursued by your sales guy, where you're confident that you have identified a sector or a vertical or an industry where your product has a good fit. So it might not be a very wide use case. Probably you might just say, let's say, for example, in my experience with WhatFix, we identified a specific vertical where e-commerce, for example, was working, right? So, I mean, I was hired when basically founders had already sold it to some e-commerce companies, and they had some other deals, of course, in the pipeline. But there was certain kind of industry or sector or a role which had a good fit with product. So that's when you know that, okay, one sector is finding a good fit with my product. Probably it's the right time to go ahead and hire other sales folks who can start targeting or start reaching out to other sectors or verticals in your industry. So that's a very kind of a elaborate answer, but in very specific words, hire your first sales hire only when you have a certain fit, uh, not exactly product market fit, a certain fit with a particular subsector, industry, or a vertical.
Understood. Okay, so now that is kind of a complex answer in the sense not many of us know how to define a fit, right? So if I had to put it in numbers, okay, if I have X number of sales or X number of or conversations. So if I had to put it in definite terms, right? Personally
Mm,
speaking, for example, in case of, let's say, WhatFix, when
mm.
did you decide to hire your first salesperson? Right? Hey, this because I have this, because I have so many sales or I have so many queries, it's time to hire a salesperson. Was that the case? If not, like, what was the case? What is that specific criteria in your experience? This might be, of course, different for somebody else, but in your experience, what has been that specific criteria which said, hey, this says we have a fit, time to hire a new sales guy?
Yeah, so when of course I was the second in terms of joining sales team at Workfix. So I was hired only when the founders had found some sort of a fit in kind of acquiring customers. So when I say fit, it basically, is there a need for it? Is there a customer? To start with, customers are not looking for your product, okay, unless you are going into a highly kind of hot market where there are multiple products already in the market. So it was a kind of a category creation kind of a product. So founders had found some customers across categories, like not just in the home market, but also in the US market and other markets, that they had some sort of fit where customers were coming back and asking for more features, or customers were asking that, coming back and saying that, okay, this is working well for us. So that's when you know that, okay, there is a fit, right? So because that's why I said you don't need to look for a product market fit to hire your sales guy. Of course, that's a good situation to be in as well. But you do not necessarily not look for product market fit, because that will take some time, right? So I was there in the sales process when Whatfix had a certain number of customers, of course, still, and which the founders had themselves sold to. So they had a good understanding that this is the customers are coming back with more feature requests, coming back with more things that you would like to see on the product, how they are using the product. So all these things, the engagement on the product. So there was certain fit in that sense.
Makes sense. So basically, if there are inquiries coming in and customers are coming up and asking for more on the product, and now as founders, you've figured out how to sell to these customers, that's basically fit, right? That's we can call fit. Okay, understood. Okay, let's assume the fit has been found, right? There's a certain kind of fit, a certain segment of the large target market they were looking for. Now you have to hire, right? What was your process? Like, basically, you can actually hire through a multitude of websites, right? But for a new company, for a new startup or a founder, when they have to hire, it is not that easy. You cannot hire everybody who applies on that website. So thinking from that perspective, right, what has been your process in hiring a salesperson? Like, what is the specific steps that you follow to say, hey, this is how I would hire a good salesperson? Let's put this criteria in it: good salesperson, right? What has that been?
So of course, you have to start looking for some sort of ability in being doing the role that you are looking to hire for. But that does not necessarily have to be the only thing that, or the most important thing you should be looking at. So when my criteria is three things. Does the candidate or the, as in the person, have the ability to learn or adapt to new things, which is going to be constantly happening in a startup environment, right? Is the candidate curious enough to ask questions and to learn more about a certain industry or a vertical which is evolving? And the third is willingness to adapt to a startup environment, because people come with certain expectations, and in startup, like, things are very chaotic, right? So you have to look for candidates who are kind of really, especially I'm talking about the first 5 employees for any role actually, and more so for sales, because there will be no collaterals, there will be no anything presentation in terms of, or it's sharing with customers, or any material that you'll be able to use that as a bait to kind of acquire more customers. So if you have to just club it in one word, all these 3 things: ability to learn, being curious, willingness to adapt, it's attitude. If the person has the right attitude and doesn't, still kind of lacking in terms of ability, I would still go ahead and hire that person.
Makes sense. Okay, so ability to learn, curiosity, and adaptability, right?
Yeah.
And you basically said, right, attitude. Now, attitude can be multitude of things, right? When I was hiring, one of the things that I used to check for was how did a candidate handle stressful environments, especially when the opposite party, be it the customer or the interviewer, might not know enough, right? They might be a
Yeah.
little bit wrong or outside, or they might have an opposite view. right? So I used to have this stress where I would like keep on pushing, being respectful, of course, keep on pushing, and just wanted to see how they would react, right? And how they react would tell me a lot, because in a startup environment, as you said, products don't exactly work, right? That has been my process. Now, to check for this attitude, right? And that might not be the right thing. I failed sometimes, I succeeded sometimes to hire good folks. But from that perspective, right? That was my personal way to check if they had the right attitude for the companies I was in. What was your process to check the attitude? Like, what did you do, or what do you suggest that a person does to check the attitude of the candidate? Basically, to check for the ability to learn, curiosity, and adaptability. How do they check? Like, what is that process that you suggest that we should follow?
Yeah, so learning and the curiosity level, you can easily judge. Like we used to, so for example, like the kind of activities we used to judge people on when we used to hire people at, let's say, in my experience with Whatfix is, we used to give them, tell them to learn about the product and give a presentation as if you were selling Whatfix to me. So role play it basically. So that will tell you whether they have the ability to learn, because it's a new product, whether they are open to learning about the product that they are going to be selling eventually, or do they have the curiosity to ask questions that okay, I don't know about how to use this product, can I go ahead and just make my own kind of research on the internet, because a lot of information is available already there on the Google, right? So you just need to go there and find it. So these two things you can easily kind of learn from in the first step itself. If you give them a task, okay, go ahead and prepare a presentation on the company that you're going to be interviewed for. That tells you a lot about whether they are serious or not as well. The third is willingness to adapt. That we used to judge based on telling them to write an email on a screen share. So go ahead and just write it can be a just 3-line email, but just write an email telling me how exactly are you going to pitch to me, or how is it going to be when you approach customers. So that tells you whether they are adapting quickly or not, because you're giving them a situation. They might already have some sort of frameworks that they might have been using in their previous jobs. And here they are on a screen share writing an email. And most candidates would either be writing very bad emails or not writing anything at all sometimes as well. So that these are the 3 things you can easily judge on a first interview itself.
I can feel the stress of writing an email on a screen share. That is stressful. I mean, that's pretty clever. I mean, that shows, right? If you're open to actually giving out your ideas and in front of strangers, and how do you feel about them? And it is very stressful. I can just feel the pain there. Okay, so moving on to the next part, right? Let's say you check for attitude, right? And you're hiring for a startup, but sometimes this also happens, right? You're instead of hiring for a startup, you are leading a sales team in a large company, and you're supposed to build a new team. You're hiring a new sales folks. So one of the things that I'm always been curious about, I've always worked in startup, is and you worked in large companies and small companies and build a startup, all those things. One of the things I was curious about is like how different is it hiring for a startup versus hiring for a team within a very large company, right? I mean, is it any different? Is it like is the only difference that there are other people who do the same thing that you are doing as a founder here? Is like, how is it? What's the difference? Pretty very curious to know.
Yeah, so I haven't worked enough for large companies, but from my experience, from whatever little I have kind of experience, so it's slightly different, except the first part, which is the attitude and the basic skills that you would look for in any role. I mean, be it sales, even in like enterprise or a startup. But apart from that, in a startup, there is more like individual kind of a thing which happens, where an individual is kind of taking all the burden on and kind of taking the sales forward. Whereas in a larger or even a mid-sized company, you're collaborating with multiple teams. So in a startup, imagine a scenario like when you're working for a startup, at most you might be interacting with 2 or 3 or 4 people, right? Maybe the founders most likely in the early days, or the tech team, if you're selling a tech product or software product. But in a larger company, in a mid-sized company, you'll be interacting with customer success, you'll be interacting with solutions team, you'll be interacting with solution engineering, you'll be interacting with support team, You'd also be interacting with procurement, finance, and whatnot, right? So you have to be more collaborative. Not that you don't have to be collaborative in a startup, but yeah, you have to be more open to listening to other people and open to other people's views and convincing them as well. So in very simple one line, I say that in a startup, most selling is done to customers, less selling is done internally. In a larger enterprise, there is a lot more selling that has to be done internally to internal stakeholders. Of course, customers you do have to sell, but there is a lot more selling that has to be done to the internal stakeholders who have to contribute towards you closing a deal.
Yeah, very interesting way of thinking, right? I've never thought of that like that. For me, I always thought, okay, there are multiple people. That means there is less work for an individual to do, right? In terms of like selling in a sale in a startup is basically this end-to-end conversation, right? You start right from sourcing deals, sometimes sourcing leads to closing it. In a large, in large enterprises, it's like, okay, you're part of one section of this entire process, so less to do. And it actually makes sense, right? If I source a lead, for this lead to be accepted as a qualified lead, the next guy has to say, okay, yeah, it makes sense. So I basically have to tell them, hey, this is a good lead, and he has to accept. Makes sense. Okay, so we've started from what is the process to hire, what to look for in a person, how do you check that attitude specifically, right? Now let's say we hired that person, right? In most companies, or especially in startups, there's very rarely a set process on what happens when you hire this person, right? We know, okay, I'm hiring for a sales role. I know this salesperson has to sell, but there is an in-between thing, right? Before they join and from before they actually started selling. So after I hire, how do I, okay, let's call it onboarding. Of course, onboarding is mostly a customer kind of a word, but you get a salesperson, now you have to onboard them. Considering you are in a startup, what has been your process like and especially if you have to get these really high output, really good sales people folks, and the idea is to get as much output and productivity out of them, make them productive as a salesperson. What do you think is the ideal way of onboarding these sales folks? Because I believe that's important, and your opinion on that I think would really add value there.
Yeah, two things, and that could be done in any kind of environment. Okay, so one is if you have some sort of a knowledge base which your customers use, or even generally you use within the organization, give access to that knowledge base if it's possible to anybody who's joining in, and everybody who joins in a sales role specifically should be knowing the product like anything, like the back of the hand, right? So that helps, and self-learning is best, right? You're taking the initiative to learn as well. The second is if you have already some sort of a repository of videos or library of videos of demos or your product videos, that is again one thing you can easily give access to your sales guys to get started with. So as a part of the onboarding process, one is the learning process, learning about the product, and the more the salespeople know about the product they are going to sell, the better they will be at selling the product as well, right? Or answering questions or answering objections. So these are the two basic things I would suggest. Anybody should do when they start, kind of before or as soon as they join an organization.
Okay, so the two things are basically knowledge base, access to knowledge base, knowing about the product, and knowing about the sales. Older videos, sales process from the is that right? Okay, got it, understood. Okay, so we gave them everything, right? But self-learning is one thing, right? But actually going into the field or going into these calls and having a conversation is a different thing, right? And self-learning, and in my opinion, if we don't have somebody to guide us, it takes a little more time to become productive because you're learning by yourself, right? So do you have a process along that? Like, what is the process to speed up this? Like, what do you think is a way to speed up this onboarding, right? Because self-learning would take time, not because people are slow or people don't want to learn, because it takes time. it's self-learning is supposed to be like that.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to guide it, right? So is there a process that you would suggest that would make sense in speeding up this ramping up process for sales folks?
There is no, sorry to say, but there is no magic potion here. You have to do the hard yards. But yeah, I mean, shadowing people on calls, or basically having one-to-one meetings, helping people understand the product, or answering the queries. These are the kind of most tried and tested ways to do that. Of course, technology comes in here. Without naming any tool, there are multiple tools out there available, which kind of helps you ramp up salespeople much more quickly than you would do in like 5 years back, let's say even. So you have to do the hard yards. There is no shortcut here. Only thing is that you, as a manager, or you as a kind of a sales lead, can help people kind of reduce that learning curve by telling them, or basically helping them avoid the mistakes that you would have done maybe when you started out, or people generally do. But I mean, you have to do the hard yards, that in very simple words.
Okay, so let's talk about these hard yards, right? Let's assume you are the manager and you hired a bunch of folks. Now you have to, guide them.
Yeah.
What would you do?
Yeah, so so initially, if you have to look at like really ramping up, so there is a certain time frame that you require, right? So you start with, of course, that self-learning thing is kind of a continuous process as well, but that will continue. But you do one-to-one meetings with people. You do take them on, do mock-up calls. You do they shadow you on calls, customer calls, actual customer calls. These are the 2-3 things you can easily do, and you do basically, and any sales leader would do that, I guess.
Is there something that you really recommend that's like your personal favorite way of teaching new sales folks?
Not really. So I one thing I used to do with people, especially when they used to be like joining new, and they're joining completely new, let's say industry or sector or a new product category altogether. Basically tell them to ask at least 3 new questions every day, if not at least 1 question every day. That tells you that how much they have learned as well. So that's a very simple way, and they would run out of questions very quickly. Within a week or 2, they would run out, and you know that they are up to the product then. If they're not asking you silly questions, or they're not asking any questions at all, you know that they are not learning, or basically they're not exploring enough of the product or the sales process in general.
That's a neat trick. I mean, we should actually
just 1 question.
I would
tell
use
them, ask me 1 question, 1 new question every day, and then I'll ask you 3 questions maybe.
Makes sense. Oh, that's a really neat trick. Okay. Now we've now defined when to hire. We've figured out a way to hire. We hired the folks. We've trained them, right? One of the things that I've seen happen in a lot of startups, especially whenever times are tricky, when the market is a little volatile, in those kind of scenarios, is this hire and fire kind of scenario. They hire a person, they stay for a month, and they leave, and this happens again and again. The person who left might get a different job, but the problem with doing that, what I've seen with companies, is every time you hire somebody, they are going to take some ramp-up time. So every time you fire before the ramp-up time finishes, that means you have to get another person, so who will again take the same ramp-up time, and the entire year goes away. You have no sales, and you've done the same sales that you would have done by yourself. Now, where I'm going from this is, for sales folks, for SaaS, our experience has been SaaS. On an average, what was the ramp-up time like? So when I mean ramp-up time is, you were hired and now you are ready to sell and being productive. Basically, you're ready to get, or you are getting new sales. What has that been for you?
Typically a quarter. Again, depends upon the sales cycle and the deal size. As you said very correctly, that it varies. So for example, if you're selling in the US market, you are selling anything, let's say ARR of 3,000 ARR or 5,000 ARR. Typically, it would take you at least 4 to 6 weeks to start kind of getting into the process of start selling the process, and the entire sales cycle would take 1 quarter. 1 quarter is when you see. And more importantly, even if you're dealing with enterprises or mid-size kind of companies where the ticket size would be much higher, you're looking at progress. Because I have been part of deals, and I'm sure you must have had experience as well, where the sales cycle has been more than a year. And that's where I say internal selling is very important. So you have to keep showing some progress to your management, to your leaders, so that they are invested in as well, in terms of resources, in terms of helping you get to the next step. So it's most like a step-by-step process. So even when you are selling a deal in a 3-month cycle, you are showing progress. And what progress exactly means to you, that has to be defined by you as well. That, okay, probably if I am able to get the customer to a POC stage, that's a win for me. I have won 25% of the deal. If I am able to take the customer from POC to getting to a pricing negotiation, maybe I have won the 50% of the deal. If I am able to take the customer from pricing to implementation discussions, maybe that's 75% of the deal. Again, depends upon the product, but this is how you should kind of map out the progress of the deal. And then that's how you kind of look at it. But yeah, in very one word, if you have to answer, like depends on the product, but typically looking at sales cycle, it should be at least a quarter. That's when you know that, okay, this is working out or this is not working out with sales reps.
Got it. Okay. So progress, right? I want to dig into that a little bit. So as an individual, I can say this deal has gone to POC, so I've done 25%, right? But as a manager, let's say somebody who's heading sales, you have to track certain things, right? Now that cannot be sales when you are hiring a new person and that person has been there in the system for 2 weeks, and you cannot say, hey, how many sales you gave me?
Exactly.
Assuming, let's say, the sales cycle is 45 days, right? But they still have to track some metrics. So 2 questions here. What type of metrics would you track for a person who has just joined versus somebody who has been in the system, let's say for a quarter or more, right?
Mm-hmm.
To show progress, not to the rest of the team. And of course, if you're a sales manager in a big larger team, to your boss. Like what kind of metrics in these 2 scenarios would you track?
So if it's a completely new sales hire, you have to look at their learning curve. Are they learning the processes? Are they learning about the product? Are they getting ready to present to a customer or talk to a customer or discuss your product functionalities or product details with the customer? So these are the 3 things you look at in terms of progressing or how the sales rep is progressing for a completely new sales hire. But somebody who's been in the system, who has, let's say, closed some deals, probably you would look at number of deals. That's kind of a North Star metric that you would look at, how many deals they have closed or how many deals are they going to close in the next quarter. It's very straightforward, I guess. In sales, there is no yes between maybe answer. There's yes or no, right?
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I asked the second part of the question, I asked for the sake of asking, but the first part actually is quite interesting, right? Because a lot of times what happens is, especially in my experience, in consulting experience, they hire a sales team and the sales cycle is 6 months long, and 4 months down the line, new sales guy has been asked how many sales you got, right? And that's completely
unfair.
counter.
That's unfair,
Yeah,
to the sales side.
yeah, it doesn't make sense. That person does not even have a pipeline yet to show you any sales. So they're just still building their pipeline, right? So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense what you said, right? Okay. Now, okay, again, going back to the process, we defined when to hire a salesperson. We defined the process to hire a salesperson. We defined how to check them. We also spoke about a little bit about onboarding, right? And we also spoke about metrics to track. But a lot of times, especially when I was running a small sales team, I was inside sales team, what happens was there are 2 sets of folks, right? 3 sets of folks in every sales team. There are people who do really good. Month on month, they keep on hitting their targets, exceeding it, right? Minimum they hit the target, but in most cases they exceed it. Then there are average guys, right? The topmost guy is like very small number, let's say 20%, 30% people. Then there is average guys who hit their targets. They might be a little short, 10%, 20% short every month, but they manage to, remain on the same level. And then there are folks who are not doing that well, right? As a sales manager, I want all of them to at least be, hitting their targets. Ideally, exceed. Like everybody should be like a superstar, right? I know I might be asking too much, right? But I want to get there as a salesperson, as a sales manager, right? How do I get there? Like, if I have this scenario going on, which everybody I know has gone through, like, how would you actually take all these folks, one, the lowest tier who are not hitting their targets, to take them to average, and how would you take this average guys to become top tier sales folks, right? What would you do?
See, first of all, you have to understand the motivation behind every individual, right? So only then you will be able to make them succeed. So there are different kind of guys even in a sales team. It's not like all sales guys are same, right? Some guys are driven by numbers. Some guys are good at relationships. Some guys are good at kind of collaborating with customers in terms of helping them. So you have to look at the strength of each one and then accordingly progress on that. So let's say the top performers are doing well, no doubt. You can't push them to get to higher numbers, but you definitely have to encourage them to reach the next milestone, right? So that is one way, of course. But for the high performers, you have to still kind of encourage them to reach the next milestone in terms of numbers. For the average guys are where the major problem lies, right? Where a lot of guys would be actually, based on my experience, a lot of guys would be in the average bracket actually, and very few guys would be in the high performing list of kind of sales users. So there you have to kind of really look at these average guys and how can you make them better or perform equally well along with the high performers. So that's where your challenge lies, and these are not like you have to treat everybody as individual, not like everybody is the same kind of thing, and have them kind of run through the same kind of processes. So for some people, as I said, like numbers kind of motivate them. For some people, different things motivate them, right? Some guys might be actually good at certain aspects of the sales process. So I would say it's not like one single thing that you do for everyone. You'd have to look at a very individualized approach, a personalized approach for everyone, for them to be able to perform to the kind of next level. For the lowest performers, or people who are not meeting the targets on a regular basis, probably the best thing would be to kind of learn why they are not doing it, and give them an opportunity in terms of kind of getting to reach those numbers. If not, then yeah, you have to let them go. Maybe they are not the right fit for your kind of product or business or organization.
Got it. But let's say those folks are, I figured out what these guys are good at, right? Let's say there are folks who are really good at relationships. Then there are folks who are really good at hitting those numbers. They might not be that good at building relationships, but they're really good at hitting those numbers. Then I figured out what their motivations are. Now I want to, upskill them, like upgrade them to the next level, right? See, of course, I can always ask them to, hey, upgrade. Hey, go to the next milestone. But I don't know how helpful that would be, right? So if I had to say, like, how would you do it? Like, if you were given such a team and there are like these folks available whose motivations, what would be your steps to get them to those numbers, right? Or get them to the next milestone, as you said? How would you do that?
Yeah, so it's like in sales, like two things work. One is achieving numbers. One is the monetary gains that you get when you achieve those numbers. So you have to, and there is a third thing I realized, where a lot of people are not just looking at numbers. Of course, numbers have to be there in the background somewhere, but they are looking at progressing within the organization as well. They're not just, so there are individual performers, right? So who would be like the top performing guys? They are just bothered about their deals, their customers, their targets and all. And there are a bunch of guys who would be looking at their deals, but they're also willing to help other people. So you have to look at that leadership ability as well. So because people who are willing to help others and not just seek help are the ones who are going to progress. Because insecure people hardly make good leaders, right? So you have to look at in that sense as well. So leave the high performance people. I mean, you have to have a good candid conversation with each one of your sales reps and understand what they are looking for themselves in the next 2 years, 1 year, or even in a longer time frame, and try to fulfill those, help them fulfill those things that they're looking to achieve with your organization in their roles. So it's no single answer that could answer this like one question. But again, I would come back to the same point and say that you have to look at every individual and try to understand what they are looking to achieve and help them achieve that. If somebody is just looking at being a sole individual performer in a IC role, probably just continue with that and help them achieve higher numbers, right? And incentivize them for that. So two things: help them achieve numbers, help them achieve what they're looking to in terms of their roles, help them achieve get to the monetary gains that they would achieve, they would get when they achieve a particular sales number. So yeah, these are the 2-3 things I would say you should fall back again and again.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So okay. See, I want to. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about or learning about is people, right?
Yeah.
Now, every individual, as I said, is different, right? And so the way to help them achieve their goal would be different. And that's the whole point of this conversation, right? So, for example, a person who wants to has a very monetary gain as their base criteria, we might want to give them of course more incentives or for achieving a certain metric, or give them opportunity to achieve those incentives. There are folks who want to lead or grow in their career, for them that kind of opportunity, right? But just giving them opportunity might not be the right thing, right? For them to improve, they would at different points in their career or in the sales process, they would need feedback that would help them improve those specific things, right? For example, if a person is in a very heavy sales, if a person is not building, obviously when I say heavy sales, I say large ticket size sales, where if a person is not building relationship, the sales might not go through, because it's all about relationship, right? So, and I might want to help them with that. I might want to give them feedback, right? So how do you give feedback? And being harsh does not really usually work, right? Especially in enterprise sales. So how do you give feedback? Like what is the right way to give feedback to these folks, right? Is there a right way? That's the first question I should be asking. But if there is not, what has worked for you before?
Yeah, so I'll talk about 2 ways here. So one is so again, it's very specific to a culture or a country or a region as well. Okay, so one is which is kind of a tried and tested way: talk about the positives, then the negatives, and provide a very clear path to get better at certain aspects of the sales process, which they are not, or which they are kind of on average, maybe. Okay. The second approach, which has worked really well for me, which I was kind of part of, like especially talking about again my previous experience with Whatfix, where I used to work with the founders directly in the initial years at least, and they used to always be open to things. So when I say open to things, so for example, let me take let's say a deal, kind of a mid-sized deal. I would go to them and tell them, okay, these are the kind of things which have happened in the deal, and we are kind of about to close, or we could close this deal. And there would be situations where you'd even lose that deal. So they would leave the final decision to me as an individual. It's your call. You have interacted with the customers for so many months. You know the customer, what is going to attract the customer to close that deal. So they will give me suggestions, 3 suggestions, 4 suggestions, whatever. And then it's the final call lies with the sales guy. You take that call. And then, okay, you might not close every deal, but I will go back to them and tell them, okay, we did not close that deal. And the only thing that they would tell me is, what have you learned from it? And don't repeat that mistake again. If you lost the deal just because maybe the pricing was high, learn from it that, okay, these are the kind of criteria that a customer has, and you did not fulfill that criteria. Or you did not give a good demo, for example, or you were not pushy enough to get them to a POC. So basically, you do a mistake, learn from it, and never repeat that. So these are 2 ways. One is where you give a kind of a positive, negative, and a clear path. And the other is where you give a suggestive kind of feedback, and let them take that decision and even make mistakes in the way, but yeah, learn from it.
Actually, the second one is actually you wouldn't usually do it. You wouldn't actually say, if a salesperson comes and say, take your own decision on that deal, because as a business owner or a founder or a sales manager, you want that sale, right? Usually people would jump on that call and get that everything right. That is a little counterintuitive, but actually makes sense, right? Gives them a sense of responsibility.
Yeah,
It would
absolutely.
give me a sense of responsibility if somebody said that to me, right? And I would want to do better on this. Makes
Exactly.
sense. Makes sense. Okay, cool. So I think that's about it. I mean, I don't have any more questions. But in our next call, I'm going to we're going to have a much better discussion in terms that we'll have another person along with you to give us a
Sure.
little more opinion. So that's going to be fun. So until next time,